Good morning, everybody. This is Lou Huger joining in today from Boise, Idaho. I teach at the University of Idaho Extension Office and focus on commercial produce safety, specifically Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rules. So we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar because we're sitting right at 11 o'clock, and we do have a pretty action-packed webinar today, as it were, so we will be using up the whole hour. So today, we're going to be in the second webinar of our webinar series for April. We had one last week that I will send around the recording link to if you missed it. We also have another one next Tuesday, same time, same place, on composting done by Ariel Agenbrod. So today we're going to be talking about this question that we see a lot in the industry when we're on inspections or on farm readiness reviews and produce safety alliance classes, or I get emails of, hey, why do I have to do FSMA if I'm doing GAP? What is this FSMA thing? What's this GAP thing? And I think it's important to be talking about understanding the differences of both programs because there are important differences. So today we're going to be talking about that and some of the overlap. So just a little bit of housekeeping. I know a lot of us are a little bit Zoom fatigued, for lack of a better term, sitting in times of COVID-19, and we have a pretty good understanding of how to use this software, but just a couple of tips and reminders to keep today's presentation running smoothly for everyone. First, if you close all of the running programs that you may have on your computer other than Zoom, that can help you to preserve bandwidth and keep things running quickly for you. Secondly, if you do start to have issues, I sent out an email yesterday and also today, just an hour before this meeting, that will have the call-in number at the bottom that you can call in if you start to have any type of connectivity issues. You won't be able to see graphics, but at least you'll be able to hear what we're talking about. As we work through this webinar today, if you have any questions, feel free to put those right into the chat. We do have a Q&A at the end with ISDA, myself, and Ariel Agenbrod, also from the University of Idaho Extension. So we will loop back around and talk about any of the questions that we receive. We have someone monitoring the chat for me. Lastly, we will have handouts available of a couple different resources that we talk about today, and also the PDF version of the slide deck if you want to refer back to that here after the webinar concludes. So I will make sure to send that out to everybody so you have access to that. And also, I just wanted to make mention of the fact that today we're going to be talking about produce safety as related to the FSMA produce safety rule, and also a little bit about the USDA GAP program. But we won't be talking about anything related to COVID-19. So if you have questions about that, you can reach out to me and I can help you try to figure out who an appropriate person to talk about that with would be, but we won't be addressing any of that in today's presentation. So in terms of talking about this topic today, we have a couple of objectives that we hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll have at least a little bit better of an understanding of. So first of all, the origins of both the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA for short, produce safety rule, which we talk about the PSR mostly as a shorthand working through this presentation rather than the long term of the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule, which is a little bit long, and also the good agricultural practices, or we've referred to that as the GAP program or GAP audit. You've probably heard of that. So basically the origins of both, the history of both, we'll be talking about that. Secondly, the difference between an audit and an inspection and why it's important to differentiate between these two terms. Third, what types of GAP audits are available and what to expect from a GAP audit. And then lastly, how a produce safety rule inspection operates in Idaho and what to expect from a regulatory inspection. So if you get nothing else out of today's presentation, just what you need to walk away with is that an audit is not an inspection. A lot of times these terms are often interchanged in produce safety, but basically they mean two very different things. First of all, an audit refers to a voluntary third-party verification, such as the good agricultural practices or a GAP certification or GAP audit, as a lot of us have heard that term. An inspection, on the other hand, refers to a mandatory regulatory produce safety or the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule visit, which is conducted by either the FDA or a state investigator, depending on where you're at. In Idaho, it's done through the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. They have investigators that will come out and do an inspection for you. A couple of other important things to differentiate is that a GAP audit cannot be done in place of a FSMA inspection because they are different programs, which we'll talk about. And then lastly, a produce safety rule inspection may be enough to determine baseline food safety by law, meaning that It is the scientific baseline of what food safety is and what type of standards should be reached in order to have a safe practice with your operation. But if you have a buyer that says, hey, I need you to be GAP certified in order for me to purchase from you, then your inspection and just successfully passing an inspection will not be enough to give to that buyer to say, hey, I passed my inspection, so therefore you won't need a GAP certificate from me that I've passed my GAP audit, because these are two separate things. So we'll kind of try to unpack a little bit of this. So when we're looking at this, it's like, okay, so why is it important? Why is this difference between the two programs important? And how do we keep ourselves from thinking that they're the same and they're interchangeable? So first of all, this is important because both programs have different applicability for growers. So basically, initially with GAP audits, they're historically buyer driven, meaning that it's required from some buyers in order for growers to enter wholesale markets. And so because of that, it's not required by law, although it can help help growers, meaning to expand into different markets. So if they are trying to go into, working with some type of packing house or something like that, because I've seen packing houses that only will take produce that is GAP certified. And so that might cause them to want to request a GAP audit. Now, on the other hand, the Food Safety Modernization Act produce safety rule inspections, so I'll just say PSR inspections from here forth now that we know what I'm talking about. So these PSR inspections are required by law for farms that are covered by the produce safety rule. Covered farms meaning that those would be those that grow foods that are consumed raw. And this can be differentiated from the list of foods that are exhaustive that are rarely consumed raw, which are below. And if you reach out to me, I can make this available to you, or you can just Google search foods that are rarely consumed raw. And I think at this point, most people know that are going to be in these classes or these webinars. They know whether or not they are covered by the produce safety rule. But I do have some good resources towards the end of our program that I will kind of walk through. So just in case you don't know if you're covered or not, but essentially these inspections versus the audits are going to be differentiated by the fact that if you're covered by the produce safety rule, then you are going to be inspected, versus GAP audits don't have to do with that coverage. Secondly, this is important because audits and inspections are conducted by different parts of government in unique ways. So the USDA GAP audits are completed through the ISDA third-party verification program. And that's the Idaho State Department of Agriculture for long. So basically this is the program that is housed within the State Department of Agriculture in Idaho. So that's kind of the overarching entity that conducts these audits. Several different companies offer different types of audits, and these different audits have unique requirements, which we have Sherry Horrocks with us today from ISDA's third-party verification program, and she's going to be giving us a more in-depth idea of what these different requirements look like. And then also audits occur annually to maintain certification, and they must be requested by the grower, which is an important distinction. Now in Idaho, on the other hand, with the PSR inspections, ISDA enforces the produce safety rules through inspection. These inspections began in 2019, so it's quite much more of a new program versus the GAP audits that have been around for a lot longer in our state. Third, the produce safety rule does not specifically outline the frequency of inspection. If we ever get updated guidance with that in our state, then I will make sure to update industry, but at this point, the frequency is undetermined. Versus, like I just said, GAP audits have to happen annually. They are requested by the grower. You reach out to ISDA's third-party verification department, and then they'll come out and do it for you. But we don't have an idea at this point of how frequently the PSR inspections will happen. But it's important to note that they are not requested, they are mandatory, and they will reach out to you. Casey's going to talk a little bit about what that, Casey Mon from ISDA's FSMA program, he's going to talk about what that looks like in terms of the way they go about scheduling these and reaching out to you. But there's a difference in the way that they're scheduled as well, because it's not something that you say, hey, I'd like to get inspected this year. It's something that they stay on top of that and they ensure that you will be inspected if you need an inspection. So third, this is really important because both programs have different priorities. They look for different things and they operate in different ways. So GAP audits can cover all aspects of an operation, including chemical usage, traceability, farm food safety planning, safe transportation, and different compliance with other applicable laws like labor laws, et cetera. And audits can focus on any commodity that a grower requests to be GAP certified based on their buyer's needs. So they may have some things that are GAP certified because that buyer wants it to be GAP audited, and then other things that aren't because that buyer doesn't require it. It kind of is a little bit of picking and choosing, and that you can have anything GAP audited. And then on the other hand, the inspections do not enforce or inspect laws that are governed by other bodies. So like chemical applications, for example, are governed by the EPA. So that's something that if you had an inspector out to your operation, they wouldn't be asking you for chemical application records, for example, because it's not something that is specifically within the produce safety rule. So the produce safety rule inspections only govern commodities that are covered by the produce safety rule, which would be the raw commodities that aren't processed, like we were just talking about. And also the practices related to the growing, harvesting, storing, and packing of those specific commodities, the ones that are consumed raw. So if you've been through a PSA training, this will look familiar to you because each of these reflect the modules within those courses that we do. But we have, these are the areas of which they'd be looking at would be employee training, ag water, so you're testing what type of sources of water you use, etc. Soil amendments, the way that those are treated, animal intrusion, equipment, tools, and sanitation, and then sprouts, which reflect the 7 modules of the produce safety trainings. So that's essentially kind of the comparison of what the two look like. But I think what we really want to do now is hear from both programs and see kind of the way that they operate the program internally, the way that audits look, the way inspections look, what growers can expect if they were to be GAP audited if you haven't been, and if you've been inspected if you haven't been. So kind of what can we expect from inspection versus an audit? So we can try to break this down a little bit further. So now we're going to have 2 guest speakers. We have Sherry Horrocks from ISDA, both from ISDA, from their third-party verification program. She's their program manager. And then we also have Casey Mon, who you guys have seen if you've been in classes or webinars with us. He's on all the time from the Produce Safety Division at ISDA as well. He's the program manager. So with that being said, I'm going to kick the floor off to Casey, and we're going to learn a little bit more about what you can expect from an inspection if you are to have a regulatory visit.
Thanks, Lou. Again, my name is Casey Mon. I am the program manager for the Produce Safety Division for the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. I appreciate you guys joining us this morning on a Tuesday. Hopefully, by the end of this, you guys will have a little bit of a better understanding, or at least we'll obtain some new information. And thanks again for Sherry from ISDA for joining us on this as well. Before we kind of really get into the overall arching theme of what we can really expect from a regulatory produce safety inspection, I want to kind of give a brief overview on the history of how we got to this point within Idaho. The Food Safety Modernization Act was signed by President Obama into law on January 4th of 2011. This is not to say that food safety was never part of our society as we know it, but it was the first major overhaul since 1938, really diving in and doing studies and trying to become, instead of a reactive foodborne outbreak society, we can be a little bit more proactive in trying to prevent foodborne illnesses from becoming an issue. And that's where we get into the overall goal of this. And that goal is to be proactive, to take and have measures in place that we're not going to be reactionary as to how did we get to this point, other than how do we prevent this from becoming an issue. In total, FSMA is made up of 7 federal rules that address, I guess we could say, our food and society in general. We have the produce safety rule, which we're going to talk about today, but we also have manufacturing or human food, animal food, transportation, and imported food. And there's a couple other, we get into the agri-terrorism side of things as well. But today's main focus is primarily going to be on the produce safety rule. But it's important to know when we talk about FSMA that there's other components that make up or represent the Food Safety Modernization Act, and the Produce Safety Rule is just one of many moving parts. Next slide, Lou. So the Produce Safety Rule. So now that we kind of have a little bit of a better understanding of what FSMA is, or the Food Safety Modernization Act. To give you a little bit of a background, Idaho adopted the Produce Safety Rule, which we will refer to, the official name is Title 21, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 112, Standards for the Growing, Harvesting, Packing, and Holding of Produce for Human Consumption. That is what we refer to as the Produce Safety Rule. So that is the term, you'll see the abbreviation of PSR that we're going to refer to throughout the webinar, or even in some of our documentation or resources that you may be familiar with. Idaho adopted the Produce Safety Rule in 2018. With that, the Idaho State Department of Agriculture developed the Produce Safety Division, which I joined just over 2 years ago, and hopes that we're going to build a program that we can both educate and regulate farms as they relate or as they regard food safety. So Idaho State Department of Agriculture Division operates under a grant provided by the Food and Drug Administration. FDA is kind of a partnership that we work with, and we operate strictly under that grant. And then the University of Idaho is our educational outreach and technical experts work with us on that grant, simultaneously providing education and outreach for farms or for anybody that may potentially one day be covered, or if anybody's just curious or wants to learn or obtain new or additional information as it regards the Produce Safety Rule. The Produce Safety Rule establishes a science-based minimum standards, as Lou mentioned a bit earlier, for the safe growing, harvesting, packing, and holding of fruits and vegetables for human consumption. When we talk about the Produce Safety Rule as a whole, there is a lot of requirements, but the 6 key requirements that we really refer to are the subparts that make up the rule. Agricultural water, which as of right now is currently under review by the Food and Drug Administration, and is one thing that we are not currently enforcing on our produce safety inspections when we're out and about. We are offering to walk through the agricultural water portion of the rule with our farms in hopes that we can educate and teach farms the way the rule as is written, as it is now, with the uncertainty of we are not entirely sure what is going to change at this moment in time. So the best thing that we can do is continue to prepare and educate and work through what we know now as it pertains to agricultural water. Another key requirement, biological soil amendments, and I know Ariel is going to be talking about that here in just a couple weeks. And then sprouts are not currently being regulated by ISDA in Idaho. Sprouts are a part of the Produce Safety Rule. However, FDA is conducting all sprout inspections within Idaho at this time. Domesticated and wild animals, we had a webinar a couple weeks ago that touched briefly about that. And then worker training in health and hygiene and equipment, tools, and buildings, which were both webinars that we covered last year in our webinar series. There's a ton of really good information. If you guys do have an opportunity to go back and take a look at those, hopefully there's some great resources there for you guys. So continuing to know the background of the Produce Safety Rule in Idaho, Section 225404 is the Idaho Code. That is Idaho Produce Safety. So when we talk about what we're operating under when ISDA implemented the rule, that is the Idaho Code in which we are working through. Produce safety inspections are mandatory. They're not optional. Lou mentioned that earlier. It is a federally mandated inspection. And instead of farms in Idaho working with FDA, you're working directly with the Idaho State Department of Agriculture. It's not to say that there is certain states that do have FDA authority, meaning FDA will conduct inspections on those states specifically. All covered farms will receive or have received an initial inspection based upon compliance date. So I know Lou talked a little bit about inspection frequency, and right now ISDA is operating based on compliance year. And what that means is inspections began in 2019 with our covered farms, and those farms that are grossing $500,000 or more of average annual produce sales over a 3-year rolling period. So those inspections began in the summer of 2019. Last year, we started with our small covered farms. So in 2020, we inspected small covered farms between 250,000 to 500,000 of average annual produce sales over a 3-year rolling period. And this year, we are going to be moving into our very small covered farms of 25,000 to 250,000 of average annual produce sales over a 3-year rolling period. So those inspections will be starting momentarily. A lot of it has to do with the weather, as we all know. But we will be reaching out to farms sooner rather than later to start kind of building an understanding of when those inspections are going to be occurring and who is going to be undergoing those inspections as well. So the produce safety inspections, to give you a little bit of a glance at how 2019 went for Idaho. In 2019, ISDA inspected 46 covered farms. Of those 46 farms, 13 farms had observations, or what we'll refer to as an out of compliance issue. 7 of those 13 farms were able to correct those issues on site. And what that means is when we were out there, we observed an observation or out of compliance, and the farm was able to take action and fix something. By the time we left there, it was 100% within compliance. So the farm was able to correct those measures. We were able to verify that those measures were correct and met the requirements of the produce safety rule, and then sign off on the inspection at the end of it. Of those 46 farms, a total of 63 inspections were conducted in 2019. And not to, again, to mention that Subpart E agricultural water is currently under review and is not currently being enforced. All of our inspections, you're going to see that asterisk on all the slides. Just to reiterate that when we are conducting these inspections, that is not something we are actively regulating at this time. Our 2020 Idaho inspection data. So from this last year, we got into our small farms. There was a few farms during this period that carried over from our large farms that were re-inspected. So they make up a total of those 38 covered farms that were inspected in 2020. So 2020, we inspected a total of 38 covered farms. Of those 38 covered farms, 8 farms recorded an observation or an out of compliance during the inspection. And out of those 8 farms, 5 of those farms were able to correct those observations on site. In total, of those 38 covered farms that we inspected, we only performed 43 inspections total for this last year. So overall, what that looks like for us is in 2 years, we've inspected 84 farms, and our average inspection time per farm from beginning to end is about 5.5 hours in total. And that's not, that number is something that is going to change. That's not to say that every farm that we visit is a 5.5 hour inspection. That also accommodates our administration time and also our travel time as well. Our boots on the ground on farm time right now average is about 3.5 to 4 hours with that. And that will subject to change too as Subpart E agricultural water becomes under regulation in next year for our large farms. So then in total, 21 farms, total recorded observations during an inspection. Of those 21 farms, 12 farms total were able to correct it on site. And to date, 106 inspections have been conducted by ISDA. So we're going to transition a little bit more now that we kind of know the history of FSMA, the history of the produce safety rule, and kind of what we've been experiencing throughout our inspections. One thing is the 2 individuals that you see on the screen before you are ag investigator seniors. We have Greg Bolhato and Lacey Phelps. And these are the 2 you may have already interacted with or will be potentially interacting with. They are going to be the ones that are going to be conducting your regulatory inspections. They're also the ones that are going to be verifying your farm's information, and also you may talk to if you call in and you have a question as well. So what to expect from a pre-inspection standpoint? It's important to know that ISDA may conduct an inspection on your farm for a variety of reasons. It's not necessarily, we know that it is a federally mandated rule, but there's also other stipulations that could be surrounded that. If there was a for-cause inspection, meaning somebody complained or filed, some sort of documentation saying that this farm has some egregious conditions, that there's potential for adulterated food to enter commerce or make somebody sick or die, we could implement a for-cause inspection where we would just show up and determine what is going on. There's also the initial inspection, which is every covered farm is going to undergo at least one time. Every farm will have an initial inspection. Thereafter, and this is something we will determine based on risk moving forward in the future, and we'll have a little bit of a better understanding of what our inspection frequency is going to look like. Farms will then undergo a routine inspection. And in addition to those, if a farm has an out of compliance that they're not able to correct on site, we would then undergo a follow-up inspection, which just means that we would follow up to ensure that that farm has either implemented practices or changes to now be within compliance of the produce safety rule, or that progress is being made. So moving forward, an ISDA Ag Investigator Senior, Lacey Phelps or Greg Blahado that you saw on the slide before, will call the person in charge or the point of contact established within your farm to schedule an inspection. So what that's going to look like is Greg or Lacey's going to pick up the phone, they're going to call you, they're going to go over a series of questions with you that apply to your operation and update your farm's information with ISDA. We're going to want to make sure that you're still a covered farm, that you're still doing covered activities, that you have covered commodities, and see if anything drastic has changed with your farm since the last time that we spoke with you. It also kind of gives us a better understanding of what your calendar year is going to look like in terms of what you have planted, when you're going to be planting, so we can plan to be there during your harvest activities to conduct that inspection. So during the pre-inspection call, the investigator, again, will cover a series of questions with you to help line up that actual initial or routine inspection date. So the investigators will call, and once we've kind of determined or gathered or obtained that information from you, we're going to try to establish a inspection date with you. Understandably, it's different for everybody. A lot of it has to do with the weather, a lot of it has to do with the commodity, but our goal is to really narrow down an inspection date that works both for ISDA, but also for the farm. We understand that you, as a grower, could be going out there to harvest on this date and something drastically changes that and you're a week out. So we definitely want to work out an inspection date that's going to work to where we can be there to witness that harvest activity. The ISD investigators will ask about the farm's biosecurity practices, any PPE or personal protective equipment, any protocols or rules or anything on the farm that they need to be aware of before they visit. One thing is we want to always be respectful of the farm that we're on. So if there's a hard hat policy or rubber boot policy, anything like that, that we have the proper equipment in place before we visit that farm. And lastly, the ISDA investigators will agree on a meeting place with the person in charge or point of contact. Oftentimes there's an office and the farm is 10 miles down the road, and that's where they want to meet. Ultimately, that will be something that will be agreed upon at the conclusion of the pre-inspection phone call. So we've talked about a pre-inspection phone call, but what about an unannounced inspection? And as I mentioned, there's some certain circumstances that surround in which a unannounced inspection may be warranted. If a farm is unresponsive or unwilling to negotiate a set date for inspection, we would most likely show up on that farm and determine what activities are occurring, determine what portion of the inspection that we can move forward with. Our goal is always to be to work with the farm, but there's some instances that doesn't always work out. It is safe to assume that a unannounced inspection may take place in that circumstance. If the farm has had produce safety issues in the past and those issues have not been corrected, and we've been working through follow-up inspections and we're not seeing the progress made, an unannounced inspection can be warranted to show up to monitor progress. And last but not least, again, in response to a complaint or a recall or food outbreak investigation, as we talked about with the for-cause inspection a bit briefly earlier. So what to expect from a day of inspection? So we've had our pre-inspection phone call and we've set up our inspection with our investigators. Now our investigators are going to arrive on your farm. They're going to do what we refer to as the boots on the ground. They're going to meet with the person in charge or the point of contact, whether that's the farm owner or the farm manager or just a food safety manager, anything from that aspect. The ISDA investigator is going to basically provide you an overview of what the inspection is going to entail. They're going to walk through, based on the questions that they asked you during the pre-inspection phone call, they're going to have a better understanding of how that inspection is going to go. They're going to be able to walk through the farmer of beginning to end, what they're looking for, and some certain questions they're going to have along the way, some requests for documentation that they're going to need that pertains specifically to that operation. The amount of the time the inspection takes depends on the type of inspections, the farm activities, size of farm, and observations made during the inspection. What this means is if the farm is harvesting onions and it's one person on a tractor and they're driving back and forth for an hour, there's not a whole lot going on. There's not a whole lot for us to see versus something if we were in a packing shed and there's multiple people and there's a lot of people touching produce and a lot of food contact surfaces. It's going to be more in depth. It's going to be a deeper inspection because there's going to be more to see. And going forward, the size of the farm, if his farm is fairly small versus the farm being fairly large, and how much produce is being harvested. The ISDA investigator will also ask questions specific to the farm's activities and commodities throughout the inspection. And the reasoning behind that is we're always trying to learn more about your operation. The more questions that we can ask that you can provide answers to gives us a better understanding of how your farm operates on a day-to-day basis. So the main goal will be to almost like pretend the ISDA investigator is not there. Our intention is to view your operation as if it's running its normal day-to-day conditions. Understandably so, having an inspector or investigator there watching does have a tendency to potentially intimidate certain employees or anything like that. Our goal is to see as if you're running as if we're not there and point out any sort of observations that would be occurring in your normal day-to-day operations that would be out of compliance with the produce safety rule. So the ISDA investigators are going to notes throughout the entirety of the inspection. They're going to conduct educational discussions and write up investigative reports in the event an out of compliance observation is made. So as they're going through and they're watching your normal operations on your farm throughout, any notes they're going to take, if there's an educational discussion that needs to take place between the person in charge and the investigator, they will notate that in their inspection. If there is an out of compliance that is documented, the investigator is going to write up an investigative report within their inspection document, and that will all be reviewed with the person in charge or point of contact or whoever that person of authority for that operation is. And then ISDA investigators may explain what they are looking at and why. If there are regulatory concerns, the investigator is going to discuss and explain the reasoning behind that regulatory concern and the public health significance. So if they're out and they're looking at a piece of equipment, they'll walk you through what they're looking for, why they're looking for it, and it also helps educate the person in charge that we're working with so that they know those are higher risk areas and they know that moving forward in the future, those are areas that are going to require a little bit more sanitation or a little bit more cleaning, so that they're also being educated while we're regulating. And that is something we strive to do, is teach or educate while we regulate, so that you guys are aware of certain elements that we identify on your farm as potential higher risk points than you may or may not have observed yourself.
Hey, Casey, I just want to give you a 2-minute warning.
Thank you. Alrighty. So then what to expect from an ending inspection. So once we have viewed the harvesting activities and the flow of your farm, and we have kind of finished the physical portion of it, we're going to want to do a record review. And that record review is going to entail what records specific to the produce safety rule that also pertain to your farm. So the investigators will sit down with you and work through that paperwork to make sure that all of your record keeping documents and everything that you're requiring are within compliance to the produce safety rule. So if an out of compliance was observed, again, we talked about reviewing that with the point of contact or the person in charge so that they're fully aware of what's being put into that inspection report. The investigator will notify the farm of a follow-up inspection if one is warranted, if something was out of compliance that could not be fixed that day. And at the conclusion of the exit interview, the ISDA investigator will review the entire inspection form with you, the investigative report, they will sign off on it, the person in charge signs off on it, acknowledging that the inspection occurred. That then is the copy of that inspection is then emailed or printed and sent to the farm or the person in charge of point of contacts. So conclusion, one of the number one questions I get is, if I'm out of compliance, are you going to shut me down? ISDA's goal is to help farms in Idaho achieve compliance with regards to the produce safety rule and prevent future foodborne outbreaks. We want to put our best foot forward of really working with farms and helping them establish the proper protocols and procedures to be within compliance with the produce safety rule. Our goal is to always work with the farms and hoping we achieve that compliance. One of the things that we do is work with the University of Idaho in collaboration to conduct on-farm readiness reviews. It's a free, voluntary, non-regulatory, confidential readiness service. What this means is somebody from ISDA and U of I will come out and do a walkthrough of your farm. Any notes that we take, we leave with the farm. And any observations we have that would be without a compliance of the produce safety rule, we would turn those over to the farm so that they could have the opportunity to prepare those potential out of compliances before regulatory inspection. So again, our goal is to always help Idaho achieve compliance. And lastly, in collaboration with the University of Idaho, we've developed a series of produce safety educational videos that really help enhance the knowledge with the produce safety rule. And those are available on U of I's website, ISDA's website, and YouTube.
Okay, thank you, Casey. That was great. So just for sake of time, we're going to go ahead and just go straight into Sherry's presentation. So I just want to welcome Sherry Horrocks from the Third-Party Audit Verification Program at ISDA.
Great. Thank you, Lou. I appreciate being able to attend and to hopefully answer some questions that any of the people may have out there. So a little bit about the auditing program. You can go on to the next slide, please. Perfect. Just to kind of give you a background of the type of audits we have and what we have performed. In 2020, we performed 347 USDA GAP farm grower audits. That includes the farm review, harvest, storage, and transportation. We also performed 147 harmonized GAP plus audits, which also consist of farm, harvest, storage, and transportation. Just so you kind of get a better feeling of that, you take those audits and we do them twice. We do our audits in two steps. We come out during the growing season and we audit the farm and all documentation associated with that. And then we also come out at harvest time, just like, I'm not sure if FSMA does it in two steps or if they go out in the one, but we do ours in two steps. We also performed 16 USDA GIP, which is good handling practices, packing house audits. We also performed 9 harmonized GAP plus post-harvest, which is packing house audits, and 9 unannounced verification visits, which is a total of 528 audits performed for the 2020 season. I have 23 auditors statewide, and they are certified in ag, and they have to apply to be part of this program, and it's a rigorous program to apply for. They have to send a resume, they have to have a letter of intent, evaluations, and at least 3 years experience in an ag-related fresh fruit and vegetable field or college to make up the difference in that. Next slide. Okay, the type of audits that we perform are USDA we all perform non-regulated audits. That's the only type of audit we perform. We perform USDA GAP-GIP audits, which is a basic audit, and it does not align with the produce safety rule. I see more processors use this type for potatoes than I do any other type of audit. The next one is a harmonized GAP audit. It aligns with the produce safety rule, but does not take the place of the regulatory audit. And the next one we do is a harmonized GAP Plus audit. It is a GFSI technical equivalence, and it aligns with the produce safety rule. And there again, it does not take the place of the regulatory audit. It is global, and that's why it is the plus audit. And the last audit that we perform are PSI audits, which is for the processors for potato growers that requested that type of audit. Okay, next slide. I think the main thing that we need to, as a grower or a packing facility, need to decide is what type of audit I need to have. Make sure that the type of audit that you are requesting is something that fits your needs, something that is going to satisfy the market or your contract or something on that level. There again, we are not a mandatory audit. We are one that suffices the market verification and procedures. So a little bit about the USDA GAP audit history. It is a non-regulatory audit. It was established in 2001 at industry request. It was requested and created in response to growing concern about the fresh produce that is safe to eat. It is developed in conjunction with FDA, Avisa, and state partners, industry groups, and academia, and it is based on FDA guidelines and industry best practices. Over time, it has been incorporated buyer requirements, industry-specific requirements, and now federal regulation. Meaning, again, this is not a required audit, but it does suffice for market. Next slide. Then in 2009, the Harmonization Initiative was created. And this audit was brought forth for one audit, and that would satisfy all buyers due to audit fatigue that the industry was experiencing. So with this, it had to be created to be applicable to all fresh produce operations. It had to have checklists for both packing house and for farmers, and it had to be based on FDA and industry guidance. And then in August of 2018, the USDA Harmonized GAP Plus audit was recognized by the Global Food Safety Initiative and FDA for FSMA. USDA is the first to achieve recognition under GFSI's new technical equivalents for government entities. Next slide. Okay. These type of audits are non-regulatory market access audits, meaning it is customer driven. It is usually performed to satisfy a contract issue with the processor, fresh pack, or some stores are requiring their suppliers to provide certification of having and implementing a food safety gap program. It does not take the place of an FDA audit. It is voluntary and non-regulated. We do many different commodities. We have orchards, we do asparagus, watermelon, cantaloupe, tomatoes, anything that is fresh fruit and vegetable. We are licensed to perform that. Next slide. So it is a commodity-based audit. So what that means is that I will always send an auditor out to you that understands your commodity. If you are growing onions, the auditor will understand the commodity specific for onions. They will understand commodity specific for cantaloupes, as well as blueberry, any other type, and tomatoes. Any other type of commodity, it is a commodity-based audit. So what might be an association or with like potatoes may not be associated with something that would be for blueberries. So you as a grower would create a food safety plan that encompasses your entire farming operation that is commodity specific within the realms of that commodity, and what are the specific rules and guidelines that are safe industry practices. Next slide. We go off of guidance documents such as OSHA, FDA, GAP, FSMA, and the FDA's Guide to Minimize Microbial Food Safety Hazards for Fresh Fruits and Vegetables. Next slide. These are the harmonized standards and the USDA GAP standards that we go by. So these are the guidelines that are used for the audits performed. Standards are broken into 3 separate templates. We have the GAP-GIP audit verification program. We have the harmonized GAP standards without the GMA requirements, which is global, and the harmonized GAP Plus standard with GMA requirements incorporated throughout the standard. These are the newest versions, and a new version of the harmonized GAPs will go into effect May of this year. Next slide, please. The USDA GAP audit is when a grower calls in and schedules the audit, you let us know which part or scopes of the audit you are requesting us to perform. The audit is broken down into part 1 is the farm review, part 2 is the harvest field packing section, and part 4 is the storage transportation section. Potato growers, storages, cellars, or if you have a building that you are storing in bulk or even finished product, the harmonized audit, we audit their entire farming operation, and this would include storages. So the bottom line is, if you are storing your own product and you are maintaining that storage, you are subject to that storage facility being audited as part of your food safety program. Next slide, please. So the scopes of the harmonized GAP Plus audit have 5 scopes. We have the general questions, we have the field operations and harvesting, and we have post-harvest. We have a logo use for marketing, and then we also have the new scope 5, which is the tomato audit protocol that was just incorporated this year. General questions must be answered for all audits. So if I come out and do your farming for your field, I would do your general questions on the checklist, plus section F, which is the farm and field. If I was coming out to do your packing house, I would do the general questions and then P for the packing house and all other scopes that are applicable. Next slide, please. Deeper look into the standard, we go by the question numbering system. All question numbers all begin with the letter which corresponds to the scope, such as G11 would be for the general, F91 would be for the farm, and P would be for the post-harvest or packing house. This allows auditors and auditees to quickly identify which scope a question is in. Next one. The next standard has a column for the requirement. This is what is required for you to receive certification to the question. So this requirement equals specification the auditee must meet. So that is what we are looking for when we come out to perform the audit. Next slide. The next column is the document. What type of record I'm looking for? WP means it would be a written policy or a written procedure. If there was an R in that document, I'd be looking for a record. So those are the type of assessments that I need to verify what type of document or record I am needing to get compliance to the question. Next slide. This question, next one here. Can I have the next slide, please? There we go. Thank you. The next one here is a mandatory. Now in the harmonized audit, in order for you to receive certification, all questions that are mandatory have to be in compliance, meaning you cannot have a corrective action needed in a question that is a mandatory requirement. If you do, the audit fails. However, it doesn't mean the end of the world. It means it was not in compliance at this time, and it may come back into compliance. However, if it is a severe one, then it could be more of an issue, and that would be where we would issue an IAR, which would be an immediate action required, and then we would go that route. Okay, next slide. The procedure explains the requirement in greater detail. It's how they do something. A policy is why you do something. A procedure is how you are doing it. And a record is always to verify the policy and or procedure has been implemented. If you remember those three things, it will help you with your food safety program. Next slide. Next one is the verification. This is how the auditor validates the requirement, the records. So the verification section here, that's what we are looking for to make sure you receive compliance to the requirement. Next slide. Okay. Next is the corrective action. This is what the auditee is doing to correct the nonconformity. And this is what an action that is leading to correction of what may have been wrong at that point, and what you as a packer or a grower would be doing to correct if there was a corrective action needed. Next slide. Auditors, as an auditor, we have to inform the applicant and then call our supervisor or representative immediately, FDA, if there is ever an immediate action or something that we see that could be potential harmful to the consumer. So we notify them if there's failure to protect a ready-to-eat commodity. That would be such as maybe we saw something out in the field that actually damaged the product and contaminated it, and then we have to report that to FDA. Obvious signs of pest damage to food, significant pest infestations, improper handling or labeling of food allergens, indication of contamination by gases or cooling of potentially hazardous foods, or exposure of food to human blood. Next slide, please. Just a review of the Harmonized. The Harmonized GAP Plus achieved government technical equivalence towards GFSI certification. We are, the Harmonized GAP Plus audit is a commodity-based audit, and it is adherence to current industry practices, regulatory requirements, and prevailing regulations, such as FDA, PSA, FSMA, and etc. It is built on the concepts of risk identification, control and mitigation risks, monitoring, verification, and documentation, included HACCP. Meaning that it is based on what you are doing as a grower, you identify the risk, and what are you doing to prevent an outbreak of happening. Those is what the main concept of the Harmonized GAP is, preventative measures. The 5 scopes of audits: general, field operation harvesting, post-harvest, logo use, and tomato protocol. 3 separate standards with 3 separate checklists: the USDA GAP GIP, Harmonized GAP Plus and Standard, and the Harmonized Food Safety Standard. And we do notify FDA for serious offenses. Next and last slide. This is a little handout that is like a comparison document that USDA puts out, and it kind of breaks it down to what you would look at to see what type of audit you need. Do you need an market access audit, is what my program does, or are you required by FSMA to do a regulatory inspection? There's your 2 differences. The market audit access, if you look to the far left, is part of the Global Food Safety Initiative. It is in compliance with Produce Harmonized GAP standards. It aligns with the Produce Safety Rule, but it does not take the place of it. It is voluntary, but we do charge a fee for service. Your certification is only good for 1 year. It is applied by USDA licensed auditors, and it's the certification of meeting audits standard and acceptance criteria, and those results will be posted on the USDA website of who or what identity has had this type of audit, and you can go onto a national website and see that. With your regulatory inspection, it confirms compliance with Produce Safety Rule. It is mandatory. It is intermittent. It is no cost. It is FDA or state regulatory inspector and documentation provided to the farmer. We also give you a copy of your audit as well as your certification. We also, just like the inspector with FDA, do an opening and closing meeting and point out any issues of concern throughout the audit to let you be aware of what we are finding so that you can observe and see what we see, and then we are in compliance with that. Then again, it is significant deficiencies are reported for correction. Our type of audits, not all, just our harmonized audits are in line with the requirements of the FDA FSMA. The regular GAP audit is not. It is a basic audit, it is a beginning audit, and does not align with the produce safety rule. So with this being said, I hope that this little document here kind of helps you see and explain to what types of audits and how we are in line with some things and how we are different in some other things. And I sure hope that this presentation has helped you. I want you to know that at ISDA, if you are needing this type of audit, my email address is on the site here, and you are more than welcome to call me and we can get any information out to you. So with that, I appreciate you, Lou, for all your help, and we will hear from you again.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Okay, so now that we've both presentations, I wanted to just give a quick summary of what we've talked about in terms of the comparison of our GAP and produce safety rule programs. So basically, first of all, GAP and FSMA are both key players in the produce safety landscape in Idaho. By FSMA, I should have put the produce safety rule. Both programs have different application, coverage, and use for growers, which are things to keep in mind when we're talking about these programs and considering the way that they can come into play in an operation. ISDA implements GAP and the produce safety rule in Idaho, but both have different departments that govern each. Growers that are looking to expand their market may benefit from pursuing a GAP certification depending on buyer needs, but it's not required by law. It can be a good practice, as it's called, but it's not something that you have to do. It's more going to be if you desire to, and or if you're trying to expand into different markets or working with different buyers or institutions or packing houses or whatever that do have that requirement or do like to see that. Compliance with the produce safety rule is required by law for many growers, but not all. So I'll go over that a little bit in just a second to help you decipher that if you're still unclear. I know some people still are unclear on what their coverage is, but I think we're starting to get to a place of most people understanding how the laws affect them, which is great. And then lastly, like Sherry was just saying, if you do need guidance on how to get started with the GAP certification, or if you're unsure how the produce safety rule affects you, we do have a really great produce safety team here in Idaho that consists of ISDA with Casey and his investigators, Sherry with GAP and her auditors, and then myself, Lou Huger, Ariel Agenbrod, and we are the two educators from the UI Extension. So we have all kinds of great resources. So I just wanted to do a really quick plug for, first of all, our on-farm readiness review program, which is led by me, and then usually an investigator or two from ISDA's FSMA program. They come out and we will come out to you for free no matter where you are in the state. It's a voluntary, non-regulatory educational visit where we just go through all the applicable laws, essentially help you figure out how the produce safety rule affects you. And then we also do a walk around to see kind of boots on the ground, what your operation looks like, to give you types of educational pointers prior to being inspected. And then secondly, our extension produce safety website for fresh produce growers. I'm going to send that out in just a second, so don't worry about writing down that link, although it's here if you want to. So on there, we have great training resources we have training videos, templates for documentation. You can sign up for our produce safety newsletter, which I send out periodically throughout the year, and also use for Produce Safety Alliance course updates and schedules and any type of other industry updates. You can see past webinars, including this one 2 weeks ago with Stephen Van Tassel. He did a great one on pest management and enclosed buildings. So we have that, and then we also will have our produce safety rule with composting on the farm webinar, which will be next week, same time, same place. Spanish resources are on there. We have a Spanish website, and then we also have a free online resource ordering form where you can go in and put any type of resources that we have available that you may need. There's photos on there and an explanation of what they are, and we'll send them out to you within a week free of charge. And then again, my name's Lou Huger, and all my information is right here on the end. At this point, we're out of time actually, but we do have a question and answer panel here. We might hang out for just a couple of seconds. If we do have any questions, feel free to pop off as well, just because we are here at the end of our promised hour, almost actually exactly, it's exactly noon. But I do want to open up just a little bit to see if we have any questions. But if we don't, we do have one more webinar, as I said, next week coming up. It's going to be the approaches to composting safely under the produce safety rule. And I will be sending out a copy of the slide deck as well as the resources Sherry was talking about regarding the comparison chart graphic of GAP and FSMA programs. So we'll monitor the chat here for just a couple more minutes, but otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Lou, we do have one question. And I think I might need a little bit more clarification from, it was Stephen that asked, is there a website or publication that would lay this out for me? Which part are you looking for in particular, Stephen? The regulations and process. So that would probably be actually going to the FSMA produce safety rule. And we have quite a few resources for that on our website and ISDA's website, and also on FDA's website.
Yeah, so I can send some of that around when I reach out here at the end of the webinar and make sure that we have links to the GAP program at ISDA. I'll also send out some of the regulatory stuff on ISDA's FSMA produce safety rule website. And I also always make sure to send out a link to our website as well. All of those kind of cumulatively have a good idea of what the process looks like with the regulations. Okay, well, I think it looks like we don't have any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and close the webinar. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great day.